My name is Daniel James Sharp. I'm the editor of the Freethinker magazine. Today I'm joined by Steven Pinker, who probably needs no introduction, but I'll give him one anyway. He's a cognitive psychologist, public intellectual, author of many fine books, including How the Mind Works, The Blank Slate, The Better Angels of Our Nature, Enlightenment Now, Rationality, and most recently, When Everyone Knows That Everyone Knows, Common Knowledge and the Science of Harmony, Hypocrisy and Outrage, which is what we shall be discussing today. So, hello, Stephen, and thanks very much for joining me.
My pleasure.
And I
Thank you.
shall I'll start by asking the biggest and broadest question possible. What is this book about?
This book is about the distinction between private knowledge and common knowledge. Common knowledge in the technical sense of game theory and philosophy, in which common knowledge occurs when I know something, you know it, I know that you know it, you know that I know it, I know that you know that I know that you know it, and so on ad infinitum. Captured in the title of the book, When Everyone Knows That Everyone Knows, dot, 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 meaning everyone knows that as well. The reason that this is significant in game theory is that common knowledge is necessary for coordination. That is, for two people to be on the same page, to act in complementary ways that benefit them both, as long as they both act in the same way. A simple example is driving on the left versus driving on the right. Particularly pertinent to our situation right now. You're in the UK, I'm in the US. There's no inherent advantage in driving on the left or the right, but there's every advantage to driving on the same side as everyone else, which you can't do unless everyone else knows that that's the side that you drive on. There are many examples of economic phenomena, political phenomena, which I review in the book, but since I am a psychologist, I spend a lot of time on the social and cognitive phenomena, where I suggest that social relationships are coordination games, like driving on the left or driving on the right, where if two people are friends, that's simply because each one knows that the other one knows that the first one knows that they're friends. It's not as if they sign a contract. And so common knowledge binds our social relationships as well as our legal and financial relationships. That's kind of the basic idea of the book. But it goes into topics as diverse as revolutions for regime change that seem to come out of nowhere, bubbles and busts in speculative investing, nonverbal emotional displays like laughing, crying, and blushing, innuendo and euphemism in language, and genteel hypocrisy. Also, cancel culture, social media shaming mobs, a number of social phenomena that hinge crucially on whether some kind of knowledge is common or private.
I think it's important to note as well that you make an important point that common knowledge in general parlance is not exactly what you mean. It's not that I know and you know. It's I know and you know that I know, and I know that you know. It's a circle, if you like. Um,
That's right. And so in that sense, the technical term common knowledge isn't exactly the same as the way we use it in ordinary conversation, because in ordinary conversation, common knowledge just means conventional wisdom or something that's widely known. If that's private knowledge, then it doesn't count as common knowledge according to the technical definition. But the book is about the technical sense.
what I mean, can you give a couple of sort of standout examples just to sort of get the idea across?
Sure. Well, I'll give an example from a couple of examples from economics, then I'll give a couple of examples from everyday social life. So in economics, the importance of common expectation, at least getting inside the head of someone who's getting inside the head of someone who's getting inside someone else's head, was first noticed by John Maynard Keynes in a 1920s paper in which he looked at speculative investing. Now, this isn't investing where you simply buy shares in a factory and you get some portion of their profits, or a company that plants trees and 20 years later you share in the profits from the timber. This is investing when you buy a stock hoping that it'll be worth more tomorrow because other people will want to buy it from you because they hope that still other people will want to buy it from them the day after tomorrow. And so he compared it to a beauty contest where the object isn't to pick the prettiest face, but to pick the face that the most other people pick, knowing that those other people are picking the face that they think the most other people will pick. And so he compared that to investing in a share or investing in currency in another country where you think that other people think that it will go up, and so you buy it in the hopes of selling it to, as they say in investing, a greater fool. Now that works for as long as there are enough greater fools to pay more for it tomorrow than you paid for it today. But eventually, the market starts running out of greater fools, and then the bubble can pop, the speculative bubble that is, and then you get the opposite, where people might want to unload their shares, whether or not they think there's anything wrong with the underlying asset because they think that other people are going to want to sell their shares, if only because they still think that other people want to unload their shares. That's also how banks can fail, where there can be a run on the bank where people withdraw their money out of fear that other people will withdraw their money. The result can be not only a failure of a bank, but a failure of the entire economy, as in the Great Depression, where when Franklin Delano Roosevelt said the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, he was capturing the idea of common knowledge, or at least common expectation. Namely, it's the fear of fear that led to the panic selling, which crashed the market. Anyway, many phenomena like that, even hoarding toilet paper during the COVID pandemic follows a similar logic. There wasn't really a shortage of toilet paper, or at least not one that the companies couldn't have quickly mitigated. But when people thought that other people were panic buying, they felt they had to panic buy, which of course became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Anyway, an example of the many economic phenomena that are driven by common knowledge. And often, because common knowledge doesn't necessarily hinge on thinking through the hall of mirrors of I think that she thinks that I think that she thinks that I think that she thinks, because cognitively that becomes pretty taxing after two or three levels, let alone an infinite number of them. But in everyday life, common knowledge doesn't necessarily depend on that kind of recursive mentalizing, as it's called. Mentalizing being getting inside someone's head. Recursive mentalizing is getting inside the head of someone who's getting inside the head of someone who's getting inside the head of someone. But instead, any public, salient, conspicuous event, something that you see knowing that everyone else can see it, can give you common knowledge at a stroke. And that's why it's often a rumor, a statement from a central banker, a meme by an influencer that can set off cycles of speculative investing or the opposite, a popped bubble. Anyway, that's an example from finance. An example from everyday life is uh, the strange potency of eye contact. Now, we've known that even in many animals, eye contact is a potent signal of sometimes of threat. If one primate looks another in the eye, the subordinate has to look away, and when the dominant stares at him, and if they lock eyes, that means that they're in for a fight as to who's going to be the dominant one. Uh, in humans, eye contact is also a threat signal, but we humans are more complicated than primates when it comes to just about anything, including eye contact. It's also a potent sexual signal. If two people look into each other's eyes, then that often means that sparks will fly. But more generally, eye contact signals that something that has previously been private knowledge is now common knowledge, whether it be sexual attraction or a desire to join a fight. As in the expression, can you say that while looking me in the eye? Now, why would eye contact have that effect? Well, when you're making eye contact, you're looking at the part of the person that's looking at the part of you, that's looking at the part of them, that's looking at the part of you, that's looking at the part of them. And so eye contact is itself a potent common knowledge generator, and it that common knowledge spreads to our social relationships, which depend on common knowledge, such as dominance, such as romance, or even just honest speech about something that people have been avoiding.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, as you say, you go into different many different phenomena in the book, from political and economic to personal and linguistic. Are you kind of offering this then as a general theory of social relations, if you like?
Well, it's a component of a general theory of social relations, yes. So the theory is that our different social relationships are different coordination games, cases where both people can benefit if they both are on the same page. Now that can be, and but they're different kinds of relationships, each one of which is a different coordination game, and each one of which is ratified by common knowledge. So one coordination game, evolutionary biologists call it hawk-dove, after the stereotype of the aggressive bird versus the peaceful bird. In a hawk-dove game, there's a confrontation over some resource, and if they fight, both of them are hurt. If they can share the territory, or one can claim it and the other defers in order, and they both avoid the costs of a fight. They have to know which of those strategies each of them is playing, and so often signs of dominance like size, strength, color, loudness will ratify who is the dominant and who is the subordinate. And the subordinate might accept subordinate status simply because fighting over it may not be worth the cost of an injury. A sexual relationship is another coordination game where both people can profit if they're both in the mood and both willing. Friendship is another, and our transactional relationships, buying and selling and trading and dividing up a task, dividing things into equal portions. If everyone is on the same page, everyone can benefit. But each one of them, so this is an idea that I owe to the anthropologist Alan Fiske, who argues that all human natural social relationships fall into three basic kinds. Communal sharing, where you pool everything, no one keeps track. Lovers, family members, close friends. Authority, where you've got a pecking order or a dominance hierarchy, the weaker gives way to the stronger. And equality, where you take turns, trade favors, divide into equal portions. What I've added to that is that each one of those is ratified and consolidated by common knowledge, and that we have developed a variety of signals. I mentioned eye contact, but there are others in order to establish the common knowledge that puts us in a relationship.
And how far would you say this theory can go then?
Well, I think I don't want to say it can explain everything. Nothing can explain everything, but I think I think an essential key to the puzzle.
Mhm.
One of the applications together with economics is in the an area in which I've independently been interested in, and that is suppression of speech versus freedom of speech. Excuse me. Where the puzzle is, why do you get kind of eruptions of cascading condemnation, social media shaming mobs, where people pile on to demonize someone because of what they've said? An inhibitor of open debate in academia, and a topic of my work on the Council on Academic Freedom at Harvard, which I co-lead and co-founded. What I suggest is that there are many social norms that govern our social relationships, not just dyadic ones between couples, but in entire groups or virtual communities. And a norm such as table manners, such as avoiding insulting someone or boasting or doing something coarse or rude at the dinner table, They're held up, those norms are held up by common knowledge. That is, they exist because everyone knows they exist. And if someone seems to flout one of those norms, in the case of academia, it's often saying something that can be perceived as flouting the norm of racial equality, saying that anything that seems to suggest that one race is compares unfavorably to another, or that compares the sexes, that flouts the norm that the sexes are indistinguishable, or that gender identity is purely a matter of personal choice and has nothing to do with biology. They're these sacred beliefs that are kind of membership credos for certain communities of like-minded people. When someone flouts one of them in public, that is, in a common knowledge setting, then the norm itself is threatened because it exists only because people know it exists. If it is breached, then the norm can unravel. So people feel the urge to prop up the norm, to police it by punishing the violator, also in an arena of common knowledge. The punishment can't be private. Everyone has to know the punishment has taken place. So just as in traditional societies where punishments were meted out in a public square, public hangings and crucifixions and burnings at the stake, where it was crucial not only that the miscreant be punished, but that everyone can see the sinner being punished and everyone seeing everyone else see it. That's what reinforces the norm before you had effective law enforcement.
Hmm.
Well, we have an informal equivalent in the world of ideas where if people flout some sacred belief, there's an urge to punish them in public. The problem being that in truth-seeking domains like science and academia and journalism and courts of law, um, the upholding norms of politeness and social harmony get in the way of the primary mission of these institutions, namely to seek the truth. Sometimes seeking the truth will uh, flout some norm, even if it's the norm is correct and the challenge to it is incorrect. You don't really know that until people have tried out an idea that is broached or conjectured some hypothesis, allowing it to be evaluated. And so I consider it to be a significant threat to science and scholarly work if, because of these social norms, possibly heretical ideas cannot be voiced without public punishment.
I suppose that um, on a more normative level, then how do we decide which um, common knowledges are the correct ones, not just in terms of whether they're true or false, but in terms of how conducive they are? Because some people would argue, well, some people do argue a lot nowadays that that the new theists, for example, as they've been termed, that Christianity or religion is essential for the maintenance of Western civilization. They might argue, well, okay, maybe it's not true, but it's a necessary common knowledge so that we can all coordinate and keep up all these democratic and liberal norms that we've come to cherish so much.
Well, you're right that idea has been broached. I think it's rather alarming, frankly, um, simply because it depends. For one thing, it depends on punishment. If especially if the belief has no grounding in empirical evidence that anyone can just open their eyes and see. If it's Jesus is the Son of God and was resurrected to sacrifice to save us from eternal damnation, you can't look up evidence for any of those things. It's a matter of common creed, and we know how it was punished in the past. Namely, you burn people alive if they dissent from it. Now, presumably, the new Christian nationalists and theo-conservatives aren't calling for burning heretics at the stake, but how they maintain this common belief, given that just empirical reality isn't going to do it, is a fatal flaw of this view. That you're going to have Jews, you're going to have Hindus, you're going to have atheists who aren't going to buy it, and unless you enforce those beliefs through common punishment, they are just not going to take hold. Also, you really don't need belief that in a talking snake that tempted the first humans into original sin, which is therefore for which you need salvation by the gruesome killing of a Messiah. Uh, there are other ways that we know of that of attaining a harmony in law and order, such as the rule of law, such as liberal democracy. Much better ones because, for one thing, they work. They don't require burning anyone at the stake, and they're the only way that a modern society with people from heterogeneous cultural backgrounds, maybe starting with the Jews, but embracing everyone else, can all live in a common society.
I guess they would say that you can't have those without having some sort of transcendent or spiritual foundation to it. But
Yeah, which is
uh,
wrong. You
yeah.
can we know it's wrong because there are highly successful societies that like the Netherlands and New Zealand and Canada and the UK where belief in some spiritual transcendent reality is squishy at best, but they get along perfectly well. In contrast, some of the world's most religious societies where they've got no shortage of transcendent beliefs are hellholes like Afghanistan, like Iran, like Congo. So it's just empirically false that you need belief in some um, dogma about the unobservable in order for people to get along. What you need is a social contract where you stipulate what are goods that everyone can share by virtue of being human, like being alive versus dead, being well fed versus hungry, being healthy versus sick, being educated versus illiterate and ignorant. We all share those, and governments are instituted to secure these rights. It's in the American Declaration of Independence, an Enlightenment document that I think got it pretty right. That's a common basis that can lead to all the institutions of democracy, including the rule of law, that have a much better track record of peace and prosperity than theocracies and monarchies.
And since you mentioned Iran, it was occurring to me earlier. I wonder. I mean, aside from the conflict at the moment, the recent protest, the huge wave of protests since December. I wonder if one could explain those or view those through this lens.
Well,
Everyone knows that this regime is corrupt and killing women in the streets for not wearing hijabs.
indeed. And I have a number of discussions in the book on how public protests can lead to regime change, including nonviolent regime change. Not always. Although my colleague at Harvard, Erica Chenoweth, has assembled a data set showing that nonviolent resistance movements have a better track record than violent ones, but by no means do they always succeed. Sometimes they are crushed. But the general idea is that was uh, first expressed by, it was clearly by Gandhi, and I'm particularly fond of probably a fictitious statement that his character makes in the eponymous movie Gandhi, where he tells a British colonial officer, "In the end, you will leave." Because 100,000 Englishmen cannot control 350 million Indians if the Indians refuse to cooperate. Now, he could also have said refuse to coordinate. That is, no government has the firepower to intimidate every last one of its citizens. What it depends on is picking them off one by one. If any of them protests individually, then they can kill them or imprison them. If everyone somehow managed to protest all at the same time, then they could overpower the government, whether by literally storming the palace or by bringing the state machinery to a halt through strikes and work stoppages. The problem is a coordination problem, which means that it's a common knowledge problem. That is, how do you get 350 million Indians or 90 million Iranians to protest all at the same time? Each one of them legitimately fearful that if not everyone stands up with them, they could be easily picked off. And so a demonstration in a public square is a time-honored way to generate the common knowledge. Everyone sees that everyone else is protesting the regime. Previously, you could have had what's sometimes called pluralistic ignorance or a spiral of silence. where everyone might harbor a belief, but no one might be emboldened to express it out of fear of punishment if they do. That results in people not expressing that opinion, with the result that everyone may think they're the only one that has the opinion. That's why it's called a spiral of silence. A spiral of silence can be broken by a common knowledge pronouncement, as in the story of the Emperor's New Clothes, where the little boy said the emperor was naked, generating common knowledge or taking what was private knowledge, everyone knew the emperor was naked, but making it common knowledge by blurting it out in a public setting. Now everyone knew that everyone else knew. And that's what allowed them to challenge the dignity and the esteem of the emperor. Similarly, if there is a printing press, if there's the internet, if there's a public demonstration, that can make the private knowledge common knowledge. And of course, dictators fear that, which is why they don't allow freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly. It's why they try to intimidate people out of assembling communally by, in the case of Iran, literally murdering them.
By the way, I should say sorry if you hear strange noises or snoring. I've got a rather noisy bulldog outside my door.
Okay,
So
as it
just in
happened.
case. Okay, good.
Okay.
I've been having to say that a lot recently. Yes, to go back then to the sort of core of the idea. Um, how much of this has to do with evolution versus cultural uh, phenomena?
Well, it's the I think what evolution gave us is a sensitivity to the difference between common knowledge and private knowledge, and a set of emotional signaling mechanisms, including blushing, laughter, eye contact, crying, um, that are hardwired common knowledge generators. Yeah, I think it also gave us the an inventory of relationships that we easily fall into, communal relationships, dominance relationships, exchange relationships. But then how cultures differ is which relationship model is in force in which kinds of people, parent teacher, parent child, customer salesperson, preacher congregant, stranger stranger, and so on. Which resources fall under which model? Can you sell body parts? Can you sell sex? Can you sell land? Um, or must you share them? And the particular way in which the signals are, what signals you are permitted to express in which social situations. All of these give a kind of combinatorial grammar of social relationships, which of course vary a lot between cultures, but made it built out of an inventory of relational models and communication methods. By the way, we haven't mentioned one of my main interests, which is language, but language is, at least blunt speech, direct speech, is a potent common knowledge generator. When you blurt something out, it's out there, which is why so often we don't blurt things out, but we veil our intentions in euphemism and innuendo, which I argue are ways of uh, avoiding common knowledge while conveying information.
Hmm. Oh yeah, I mean, you say I've got the quote here somewhere that words are the earliest and most omnipresent exercise of common knowledge in our lives. Um,
Well, yes, even not only do we is the use of language a way of generating common knowledge, but even knowing a language is as you just mentioned, itself depends on common knowledge. Because if I use a word, it the word doesn't convey the concept by its sound, as Shakespeare said, a rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. But a word works because I can count on other people associating it with the same concept that I do, which I know that they're willing to do because they know that still other people are using the word in that sense. So words are conventions. Driving on the right is a convention. Paper currency is a convention. Convention being a way of doing things that benefits everyone if everyone does it the same way. And words themselves, since kids start are becoming sensitive to words at about 6 months. They start to use them at about a year. And when they use a word, they know that if they hear it from their mother, they can use it with their sibling, with a friend, with a stranger, and expect to be understood. They have a tacit sense that words are common knowledge conventions.
Hmm. Yeah, and yeah, it's yeah, some of the examples you give of words that have sort of drifted from their original meanings, but we all know what everyone else means by them, like bathroom. There doesn't actually have to be a bath in the room for us all to know what we're talking about when somebody's going to the bathroom.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yes. And there are dialectal differences, such as in the UK versus the US. Uh, a public school has a very different meaning for an American than for a Briton. And of course, slang terms. Uh, like can I knock you up? In American English, that means get pregnant. I think in British English, just means to not knock until someone, a sleeping person, has awakened.
would you say, was there anything in particular that sort of led you down this path, some event or phenomenon that made you think about all of these different phenomena in this particular way before you started writing the book?
Yeah, for me, it was my interest in language, where a commonplace in linguistics is that a lot of speech cannot be interpreted simply by looking up the meanings of the words and the grammatical rules that combine them. Such as in politeness, if you could pass the salt, that would be awesome. The meaning of that is not if you can pass the salt, that would be awesome. Uh, or veiled bribes. Um, is there, some way you could shorten my wait? Do you think you might have a cancellation? Veiled threats, like, nice story you got there. Would be a real shame if something happened to it. Veiled sexual come-ons. You want to come up for Netflix and chill. Uh, Fundraising solicitations. We're counting on you to show, to be a friend of our university and to show leadership. Translation, cough up money. All of these, and so it's long been known that a lot of language works this way, and that there's a whole other layer on top of syntax and semantics. Linguists call it pragmatics, namely how language is interpreted in a social context. And there was a lot of work done since the 1950s on how we go from the literal content of a sentence to its actual intention, but much less on why we go to the bother. Why are these rituals there in the first place? Why don't we just say what we mean? It would be so much more efficient. And that's what led me to ponder what is it about our social psychology that makes us avoid the use of direct speech? What's gained by hinting, shilly-shallying, euphemism, counting on our readers, our listeners to read between the lines? And that there are a number of hypotheses, more than one of which is true, but I think the most potent is that direct speech generates common knowledge, and the common knowledge is what drives our social relationships. In the simplest case of politeness, like if you could pass the salt, that would be awesome. What you're doing is you're avoiding a signal that you're treating someone as an inferior, as a servant, as in, if you bark at someone a command, give me the salt, depending on the level of intimacy and the level of power, it can seem like disrespect, like it's trying to establish a hierarchical relationship where an egalitarian or communal one is appropriate. And so we convey the message that we want the salt without seeming to establish a dominance relationship of an imperative or a command by a non sequitur that in context can be interpreted as a request. Anyway, the pathway was via language.
A little a little common knowledge is a dangerous thing, you may say.
It can be, yes.
Would you? I was interested since since it comes from your interest in language, how you relate this to your other works, your previous works, because you know it goes into language, politics, and you've written at length about the importance of the Enlightenment and moral progress, societal progress. Um, so yeah, I wonder, like, you know, just what are your thoughts on that? Does this sort of provide a framework looking back on some of those earlier.
So coming on, not, I mean, not directly in terms of what propelled human progress, um, but it figures indirectly into many phenomena behind human progress, such as the fact that science, figuring out how the world works, depends on avoiding certain kinds of social norm enforcement. That is, for science to progress, you can't constantly worry about what will ruffle the feathers uh, of esteemed members of society. They may be offended by things that science turns up. I recount an anecdote that many biologists recount as uh, uh, a simple fact, but which, when I fact check, turns out it's apocryphal. But it's a great story anyway. But according to the story, when a Victorian lady, in some versions she's the wife of a vicar, learns about Darwin's theory of natural selection, she exclaimed, "Descended from apes, my dear, let us hope it is not true. But if it is, let us hope it not become widely known." Now, she could have said, let us hope it not become common knowledge, because in the day, the belief that humans were created was a sacred belief that was thought to underpin morality and decency and harmony. And so the threat to that belief, not so much the threat to the belief, but the threat to the belief becoming common knowledge, that is, everyone knowing that everyone else knew that it was false, was thought at the time to lead to an unraveling of society. Falsely, we now know, and as with other heretical discoveries, such as the Earth not being at the center of the universe, uh, the society moved on and figured out how to establish moral norms that didn't depend on a factual um, uh, falsehood. But the fear when these ideas are first broached is often that they will erode the moral underpinnings of society, and that's why heretics are so often punished publicly.
Hmm. It reminds me slightly of Thomas Paine. The sort of critiques of religion that he published for the common man were very strongly put, but they weren't substantially different from what people had been saying in salons for decades, if not centuries. But it was the fact that it was designed to be common knowledge, as it were, that got him in trouble.
It's a good example because his pamphlet, which I think was called Common Sense, not the same as common knowledge, but related. But it went, as we would say today, viral.
Hmm.
It was a bestseller of its era. It was translated into many languages, and it has been given credit for the American Revolution,
Hmm.
um, among other things. So yes, that's a great example, and that's why freedom of the press, freedom of speech are so essential to a democracy and to science, where we often call it academic freedom.
Well, I think that's a nice place to start wrapping up.
Okay, well, thanks. It's been
Uh,
great to be on the show. Thank you very much, Daniel, for having me.
Thank you. Is
And
there anything else you'd like to add? Just
just that I think the Free Thinker Society is more important than ever. We've got our work cut out for us, and I wish you great success.